Letter 5. In my last letter, I supported the assertion that the wheel described by Ezekiel was actually a vehicle. This is the most logical interpretation given previous conclusions. Our universe is connected to at least one other parent universe, super-sea travel is theoretically possible and therefore probable, and super-advanced technology exists. All of these conditions lead one to the conclusion that vehicles are used by those beings from that other dimension that we can safely refer to as heaven, to complete interdimensional travel. We must remember that even though these vehicles utilize super-advanced technology, the operators still must exist in our frame of reference at the lower spectrum of physical laws in order to interact with our reality. Therefore, these vehicles must be able to function on our level and be able to transition from our level to a higher dimension. The natural, logical conclusion then is that these vehicles create sonic booms whenever they arrive to or depart from our reality. Although there are designs that may be capable of eliminating these booms, it is common sense that our Father would not use such a design in order to produce the desired effect. This then brings us to another lesson to be learned from the description of Ezekiel. Along with other scriptures, whenever thunder and lightning are discussed in the Bible, one must be aware that the passages may be referring to one or more of these vehicles. Another lesson is, how many other religious writings do you know of that refer to flying vehicles in ancient texts? We have to be practical on this issue and recall that we ourselves use vehicles that operate on our level of physics. It is almost certain that beings that operate on a higher level of physics with super-advanced technology use vehicles also. Thus, the verses from Ezekiel cited prior are my first exhibit supporting the Bible as the correct representation of the Creator that logic and science demand exists. My next exhibit is the account in Genesis of the introduction of man to this planet. Genesis 1:24 through 1:31 gives an account of the introduction of animals and man, and this comprised the sixth day. Genesis 2:1 begins the seventh day, and we see that all was good, but there was no man to till the soil. Then God formed a man and breathed the breath of life into the man, giving him a living soul and placed him in a garden to the east. There are a number of lessons to be learned from these few verses. First, we have to recognize that there were two men created in the beginning chapters of Genesis. There is a distinct break between chapter 1 and chapter 2. It is apparent also that the second man was to till the soil while the first man had dominion over the wildlife. These verses clearly state that hunters came first, followed by farmers. It is generally agreed among historians that, per the archaeological record, hunters/gatherers did in fact precede farmers, or agriculture, as demonstrated by the following quotes from Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia. All archaeological evidence to date suggests that, all human beings were hunter-gatherers. The Neolithic Revolution was a term first suggested by the Australian archaeologist Vere Gordon Childe as an explanation for the switch made by ancient peoples from nomadic, hunter-gatherer behavior to a settled agrarian way of life. It has been called the single most important change in the history of humanity. The verses from Genesis cited above are then indisputable evidence that what some consider recent knowledge revealed by archaeology was actually written some 3,400 years ago, more or less. In fact, the civilizations formed by these men appeared so suddenly that there is no record of a transition from savages, or tribal societies. Second, notice that in those scriptures cited above from Genesis, the man created in chapter 1 did not receive the breath of life, or soul, while the man in chapter 2 did. I conclude from this that the men and women introduced to this earth in chapter 1 were actually transfigured from the parent dimension. Which is to say, they were deposited here by our Father, not created as new beings as the man in chapter 2 was. Perhaps they were inhabiting the earth prior as spiritual beings and then transfigured to flesh beings. They were transfigured from their original, angelic, spiritual bodies into flesh bodies subject to this planet and thus did not require receiving a soul, having already received it in the parent dimension. It is this insertion of beings transfigured into humans that explains the sudden appearance of modern man with no apparent link to the primates that existed at that time. It is these people that comprised the original hunter-gatherers and the second man created in chapter 2 who produced the agricultural revolution, the tilling of soil and farming of crops. Now let's look at the man created in chapter 2. The Hebrew word for man, meaning mankind, is Adam. The man created in chapter 1 is mankind while the man created in chapter 2 is, the man, according to the Hebrew, the man we call Adam. The Hebrew text clearly uses a preposition to indicate the man, a specific man, as opposed to a man, and in fact, it indicates an emphasis to make sure there is no doubt that we are talking about Adam and not mankind in general. So, we must now ask, can it actually be that a man can be created from clay? Consider that a lump of clay can be divided into its individual atomic components. Each atomic particle is represented by the famous energy equation E equals mc², where m is the mass of the particle. We know that particles with mass can be converted into energy, in supercolliders, that energy, certain frequency, certain wavelength denoted as nu, and that the energy equation of the particle wave is E equals h nu, where h is Planck's constant. We know that every element has its own characteristic wavelength and that wavelengths can be manipulating its velocity and thereby its frequency and energy. Interference. And let's not forget that a super advanced technology exists. Theoretically then, one could take a mass particle, let's say iron, turn it into an energy particle, change its wavelength to that of, let's say, carbon, and then turn it back into a mass particle. The result would be producing a different element, carbon, from the original, iron. The process only requires the addition or subtraction of energy from the energy wave. There also exists in our basic scientific repertoire the ability to trap particles. Furthermore, recent experiments have shown that mass particles can be produced from the collision of high-energy wave particles, the reverse process of producing energy from mass. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that our Father can take a lump of clay of the required mass, separate it into its atomic particles, convert those particles into wave particles, change each particle's wavelength, thereby producing different particles, convert them back to mass particles, and assemble those particles into a final product. While the preceding discussion isn't an exhibit in support of the Bible as the legitimate representation of the Creator, it is a Bible lesson in that it demonstrates how one can come to acceptance of some difficult scriptural propositions through a little contemplation of the facts and the application of scientific knowledge. So far, I have introduced Ezekiel's flying vehicle and the description of the appearance first of hunters and then farmers as exhibits that the Bible is the true representation of our Father, the Creator, because these scriptural accounts document reality. While possibly being controversial to some, the facts remain irrefutable. And there are plenty more exhibits to draw from, some of them quite simple. For example, The health benefits of red wine. According to BUPA, scientists have discovered that certain compounds found in red wine are beneficial to one's health. Is this conclusion really a discovery? Let's see what the Bible tells us regarding red wine. 1 Timothy 5 verse 23, Drink no longer water but use a little wine for thy stomach's sake and thine often infirmities. It is one thing to investigate and report the mechanism by which wine accomplishes its benefits, but it is another to claim the discovery of the benefits when the benefits of wine were reported some 2 millennia ago, more or less. If only more people would study and allow their eyes to be opened. Once again, how many other religious texts describe the health benefits of red wine? The above verse also demonstrates that we do need both books of the Bible, the Grand Old Book and the New Book, because information confirmed by scientific investigation is given in both, thus establishing the authority of both. Also, I would be lax in not stressing that the verse above states, a little wine. Another exhibit that establishes the Bible as the logical choice for representing our Father is the work of Albert Einstein. The poor fellow spent many brain-racking hours, no doubt, while he was developing his theory of relativity. During this development, Einstein finally reached the conclusion that for his theory to work, time could no longer be constant. The equations of electrodynamics would only be valid in one frame of reference, violating Einstein's first principle. It was to resolve this apparent contradiction that Einstein made his single most dramatic move. He criticized the very idea of time as it was usually understood. In particular, he relentlessly pursued the meaning of simultaneity. Only by critiquing the foundational notions of time and space could one bring the pieces of the theory, that the laws of physics were the same in all constantly moving frames, that light traveled at the same speed regardless of its source, into harmony. In other words, he decided that time would have to be a variable in order for the equations to work out properly. Could it be that he came to this correct conclusion after studying Scripture? Let's see what the Bible has to say regarding this subject. Revelation 10 verse 5, And the angel which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth lifted up his hand to heaven, 6, and sware by him that liveth for ever and ever, who created heaven, and the things that therein are, and the earth, and the things that therein are, and the sea, and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer, 7, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. The above verses are speaking of the time when the mystery of our Father is at an end, when he shall finally make his presence known. Verse 6 specifically states that there should be time no longer. To the superfluous reader, it would appear that it merely refers to time running out as though something were about to end, not time itself. But we need to go to the Greek to understand exactly what is actually being said. Accordingly, we find that the translation, rather than the interpretation, of the Greek is that time will no longer be. Quite a different take than time has run out, wouldn't you say? This is the correct interpretation. And this is another exhibit supporting the Bible as the correct representation of the Creator, our Father. Does anyone actually think that the writer of the book of Revelation knew that time was a variable some 2,000 years ago? Of course not, he was given this information. Are there any other examples of time being no more written 2,000 years, more or less, before Einstein? Yet another example of the knowledge contained in the Bible is the subject of fat in our diet. It is generally agreed that the consumption of too much of the wrong kind of fat contributes to many unhealthy conditions. Recently, the Atkins diet, a fatty diet, has made headlines. However, this diet is a special case in that as long as you limit the amount of bad fat, and fat is the primary source of metabolic calories, it may be safe. The problem is many people do not have the willpower to ensure that they do not consume other kinds of or too many calories. If one can control their diet and ensure that the fat they consume is burned off, then the diet is workable. But for a good many people, that is not the case, so why not go with another health admonition? Leviticus 3 verse 17, it shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood. Leviticus 7 verse 23, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Ye shall eat no manner of fat, of ox, or of sheep, or of goat. 24, And the fat of the beast that dieth of itself, and the fat of that which is torn with beasts, may be used in any other use, but ye shall in no wise eat of it. Now, while some of these verses are in relation to the burnt offerings, we know that the instruction to not eat the fat of the meat is sound advice, based on recent findings that suggest it is unhealthy. Besides, the priests were allowed to eat some of the meat after the burnt offering was made, for our Father would not have a beast slain just to please himself, and he specifically instructs us not to eat the fat because he knows it is unhealthy. So why even waste time debating the issue? Just keep fat to a minimum and eat wisely. The above exhibits plainly reveal that the Bible is the true representation of our Father, the Creator. Can anyone doubt the validity of the knowledge contained therein? Knowledge written some 2 to 4 millennia ago and just recently established as true by science.